To order. Thank you. Good afternoon and welcome to the Transportation Committee meeting of Wednesday, October 23rd. I'm Councilman Mike Bonin. I am joined here by my colleague Paul Koretz, who has suddenly moved to my right. Mr. Koretz, oh wait, before I recommend anything for consent, we have people who have filled out cards for multiple comments. Hold on just a second. We will start with Corey Schmidt, followed by Wayne Mencino, and then Mr. Previn. You will have 2 minutes for all the items, and then a minute for general public comment.
Okay. Corey Schmidt, for the record. I am pissed off right now. I am trying to hold back. I have been undoubtedly rejected from speaking at one of the 2 meetings that I was signed up for just now. And so to speak to the items that we're talking about, we've got a bunch of permit parking and no RVs and pretty much just parking up the wazoo is crazy around here. So I agree with the permit parking, but at the same time, the reason that we have no parking is because of all the properties that we're building, and we expect people to not have cars and not to drive them, but they do it anyways. So I think that we're butting ourselves against each other. I just don't think it's working. I think there was something else about bike paths and spending $8.5 million on landscaping for that. So it felt like a high number. I'm not sure what you guys think about it, but it seems like a high number to me to be clean and stuff. I mean, unless you're paying me, I'd be done. But if I can talk about, transportation in general, I want to bring up the Brown Act violation that I just experienced because there is no possible way for me to transport myself from one meeting to the other in a reasonable amount of time to speak at each meeting. So you have 3 meetings set up at the same exact time, and you guys made sure to open the one, and then while I was in the one, closed out the other meeting like that. Like literally within seconds, I went over there and the meeting's already done. And that one was the more important one because it has to do with the cell towers that I keep bringing up. So, thank you.
You have 1 minute for general public comment?
Okay. So, just gonna reiterate the transportation between committee meetings. It's unreasonable. So I think you guys need to figure out different scheduling because it's not working, and there's going to be some problems from it. So I suggest you guys make a change.
Thank you. Mr. Previn?
Thank you. Does this pass as a quorum up here?
2 out of 3.
Impressive. It's a stately quorum. I wanted to address first what Mr. Schmidt just said, because I think it's a very good point. It's happened to me twice that the 3 1 p.m.s lined up at once. In a climate where, for the record, City Council basically gives people an opportunity to comment in these committees only, because by the time most of these items make it to the floor and Council and all the, not just the 2 of you who are very stately, but the rest of the 15 are all there, comments are typically closed. So it's very important that they not be prohibiting by starting at the exact same time. Now, there's a way to fix that, and we've given you the opportunity to amend it so that you acknowledge that people do have an opportunity in committee to actually address it. Because otherwise, you're offering a false opportunity. Now, 11 and 12, I just want to thank Howard Sunken and Krikorian for considering suing Waze. If he's working on that, maybe he's got something else today. But Krikorian came to our neighborhood, and he wants to sue Waze because he's convinced that in Studio City, when you come down Laurel Canyon, make a right on Sunshine Terrace, everybody makes a left down Carpenter to get over to the east part of our neighborhood, which is what we do. It's not Waze. And what he did was he had a local meeting with CD2 Steam. In fact, he's hired Gibson Transportation, so this is a great success. But we can't see any of the records because Kara Trosian hasn't provided those. But nonetheless, they didn't tell all the other people. They just told individuals who were very nearby. So it looks like a fundraising play. And then when we talked about it, one of our neighbors with the community rep for CD2, she said, oh, we can't really notify everybody because it's fundraising time. So this obviously smells to high heaven. And then I'll just roll into the preferential parking and the 22-foot vehicle restrictions. Buscaino is running large in that department today. But let's just be clear, we have a terrible crisis, and by making it harder for people to put their vehicles anywhere.
1 minute for general public comment.
Yeah, I'll just roll on. You know, to put your vehicle at rest, we have, you know, I think we know about 8502 and the other one. We're just not helping by rolling out, and sir, I'll give you credit, it has been an expansive, historically expansive rolling up of the red carpet for regular members of the public by selling for $35 a placard to the neighbors. I mean, what neighbor is not going to say $35 and you own that space? Everybody will go for it, except for in my neighborhood, because we're populists who want people to be able to come to our community. So they rejected it in my neighborhood. But as Nagel will confirm, many of my fellow D-bags in the area are signing up as quickly as they can, because Krikorian has put the sign in the window, campaign time, if you want to own your street, let's move. And I find it appalling, I must tell you. And Gibson Transportation, professional outfit, but I'd like to see the receipts, not the receipts, the invoices that they've submitted to CD2 if he's really paying with public dollars to have his little campaign team working for him. Thank you.
Mr. Spindler, you have 2 minutes for the items on the agenda and a minute for general public comment.
Yes, transportation niggas 501c4. So, number 10, you blood-sucking nigger motherfuckers and taxi cab franchises. Extending by 6 months, you and other faggots at the Buchan Airport don't let us pick up our passengers and drop them off in the upper bowl no more. Why? Liar, thief. So the union says you're going to extend it with a streamlined permitting process. Where's the money we paid for our medallions before? Now, I want a full refund of all my taxi fees I paid for the last 5 years, because I've been fucking driving that taxi from 1 to 5 a.m. That's why it's so hard for me to get to all these fucking meetings at the same time. So we get now, number 1, we have the 8th District denying the parking of vehicles called motorhomes to niggers. And are they in the neighborhood of niggers? And are they in other areas where there are no niggers? No, it's only against niggers. And then you got more on number 2, the same sleazy shit. 3 in the sleazy and 4 in the sleazy, and also 5, the private sale. Now, I fix cars and I sell them to niggers, and I get good money for them, but I need to park my car on North Lagoon Avenue when I'm finished and I'm selling it, and I put a for sale sign. For sale. $99.95 plus a bag of crack, and I've been doing good. Now you denying me my business rights in the 15th. And now, motherfuckers, we get to tomorrow is the Metro Board meeting. These motherfuckers have all of these 3 meetings scheduled at the same fucking time in 3 different fucking rooms so that I can't make more than 1 meeting. But I come here because we got the filthy Jew and the faggot here, so that's the top shelf, followed by the Chinaman, and finally the cop. So that's what we has to do in the ghetto, is prioritize, exercise, maximize the First Amendment, the 4th Amendment, and the 14th Amendment under 42 U.S.C. 1983. And that's why we're expanding our fundraising. We're going to go into north of the 10 freeway, emancipating our people. Fuck the city and fuck that faggot mega city in the air.
Is up. Please return to your seat. and
Mr.
stay
Chair?
quiet. Yes.
Just for the record, because I think we have some uninitiated people who have not been to a council meeting or a committee meeting before. We have lost some lawsuits, and as a result, the city attorney's interpretation is that we have to allow anyone to say essentially anything they want, regardless of how reprehensible. And so, as vile as the things are that you've heard said and may hear from the audience, those are not necessarily things that we as a council are in any way supportive of.
I think it's fair to say that not only are there things we're not supportive of, there are things we are deeply, deeply offended by, as I'm sure almost all of this audience is. And frankly, it's an attempt to try to keep you from these meetings and an attempt to keep you out of the democratic process. And I'm sorry you have to tolerate it, and that your sensibilities, your ears, and all of your other senses have been offended. So that closes multiple public comments. We have a couple other people who have filled out cards for general public comment, and I'd like to call them up now. Aiden Javaj and Mike Seifu. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Good afternoon. My name is Aydin Kavak. I'm a taxi driver. I'm with Yellow Cab Company, and I have been driving a taxi for about 20 years. I'm here on the subject of having the rooftop advertising, digital rooftop advertising. I understand that the city does not want to allow us to use them, but the rideshare companies are already using it, and that's about a $300 per month income to them. And we are truly going through some tough times as taxi drivers, as the whole industry, and you are very well aware of it. So this $300 will help us a lot. I mean, we're trying to get whatever we can, and please find it, decide on these rooftop advertising to be placed on the taxi cabs so we can get extra $300.
Thank you. Please go ahead, sir.
Yeah, my name is Makub Saifu, and I'm driving with the Yellow Cab for 18 years, and still I'm looking for this rooftop top advertisement is one of a good income for the drivers, and it can help us in any way. You guys decided the right thing for the drivers. So today we are here to see Uber and Lyft are already advertising on top of the roof the digital advertisement, and we know that the income is $300 a month. So that is for a taxi industry. For the drivers, it's a good income and helps us to maintain the cars. And we are struggling. And every dollar you take away from the us hurts. Please do the right thing and help driver earn a living now. So,
thank you very much, gentlemen. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming down today. Okay, that closes general public comment. And that brings us to the agenda. And colleagues, I was going to recommend for consent items 1 through 9. Are there any items that you'd like us to pull from consent?
I'd like to pull item 8.
What item?
8.
8.
Okay, so without objection, items 1 through 7 and 9 are approved. That will bring us then to item number 8.
Item number 8 is a bond and price motion instructing LADOT to maximize signalization priority for the Expo rail line where it operates in street running mode, and to report relative to reducing Expo lines end-to-end travel times and time reliability.
Thank you. I don't believe there was a staff report on this one because it was my motion, so I'll sort of explain it. This is an idea that has frankly been a long time in coming. One of the most successful mass transit projects that we have ever experienced is the Expo line, bursting at the seams, exceeding its long-term ridership projections just in the first couple years. Metro recently experienced significant overcrowding on the Expo line due to service cuts, and on the Metro board, a number of passengers raised concerns, and I gave voice to many of those, and we restored the service, the peak hour service, to Expo. And in doing so, the riders and the staff at Metro reminded us that there is another way we can significantly improve the speed and the performance of the Expo line for those who use it, and that's by increasing signal priority for the trains as it goes through streets in Los Angeles where it's currently stopping for every single red light, inconveniencing scores of passengers and significantly slowing down the Expo line. So with this report, we're asking LADOT to take a look at how that can be changed. And I understand they've already gone out to Santa Monica and seen what they're doing there and saw some interesting stuff about how they're handling the traffic, Expo and Lincoln, for instance. But Mr. Koretz may have some questions. So Dan, if...
Yeah, we have two noticeable problems in Expo. One is the overcrowding of all the trains at certain hours, and the other is north-south traffic. I mean, I've experienced the oddity of driving north on Overland at, I forget, say around 9 o'clock at night, and literally waiting 10 minutes as each set of trains would go by, and another minute it's about to raise, and then another train goes by. So I'm wondering, number one, if we do this, does this have a positive impact or a negative impact on those long waits? And also, have we done anything else that's encouraged overcrowding? I vaguely recall reading that Metro started running fewer trains on Expo, which I would say would have a direct correlation if true. And also I'm wondering if there are any possible increases in the number of cars that run together, and if we've looked at both of those issues as well.
I can handle the Metro part since I guess I'm the only Metro person in the room. Metro has recently as our last meeting, our CEO indicated that we are going to be restoring Expo to full service and actually increasing the service on the Blue Line. So we'll be going back to the previous service that we had.
Do we think that'll have a significant impact on the oversubscription that we've been seeing?
It will have an impact on it. It remains to be seen how significant it will be. I mean, it's always been a heavily used rail line.
And are we running the maximum number of cars we can hook up in each set during rush hour?
Yeah.
So then this would be the only additional idea that we can come up with to speed things through.
Yes, and I think, Dan, you can speak to Mr. Koretz's issue a bit better on Overland. My understanding is that at Barrington and Overland, the trains already have priority. Am I correct?
Yeah, Dan Mitchell with LADOT. So at Overland and in that part of the Expo line, the signals run in a preemption mode. So the train comes, it has gates that come down, the signals work to clear traffic at the crossing, and then the train comes straight through. So this effort, that would not be addressed by this motion. That is, the traffic on Overland is simply impacted by the frequency of the trains at those crossings. More trains cross per hour, the more interruption happens.
So my fear is that we would do this at every potential crossing, and everyone would be experiencing the same thing that I've experienced on rare occasions because I don't go through that intersection that often, and others have complained about as well. So we may be spreading that problem to all the crossings on that whole line.
My understanding of this motion is it addresses the maximizing the signal priority. And so in the eastern part of the Expo line, the trains run on street running with traffic signals. And the department operates those traffic signals using a priority system and a coordination system. The idea is that the trains can progress through the traffic signals in a coordinated way and allows the department to give priority but balance the impacts to the cross traffic, left turns and straight throughs. So that's something that we will be taking a close look at, and if we have recommendations around changing the way it operates, then we'd of course identify the impacts.
Yeah, so you'll look at the balancing issue in those cases.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Great. And of course, in that part of what you look at is the fact that currently the Expo trains are, by the current system, delayed by as much as 15%. And I suspect you also balance the impact that each Expo train or peak hours averages about 250 passengers aboard, which is about 2,500 passengers an hour. So we want to make sure we get that calculation in there. Okay, so
Yes.
we will give you the direction to do this, and we will look forward to the report back.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So you're going to approve the motion?
Yes, so we'll approve the motion and have them work on it. Okay, that will then bring us to item number 10.
Item number 10 is a DOT and city attorney reports an ordinance relative to extending the terms of the existing taxicab franchises by 6 months and replacing the existing franchise system with a streamlined permitting system.
Okay, and before staff comes up, we have one public comment card on this. So Dominic Rubalcava. Good to see you, sir.
Councilman, good to see you.
How are you?
Good. We would like the committee to support the staff's recommendation for the extension. I'm speaking on behalf of Yellow Cab. Yellow Cab is very happy with the work that staff and the city attorney has done on these matters. Very complex, very elaborate in terms of the number of moving pieces, and we'd like to make sure that we do it right. We think giving staff that additional time will achieve that goal and make the transition smoother and put us in a position to continue to offer good service to the riders of Los Angeles and give them a good alternative for their transportation needs.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
Would the record reflect I didn't use one swear word?
The record will so reflect. Thank you. Okay, staff can come on up.
Good afternoon, council members. Salita Reynolds, General Manager for LADOT. I'm just going to give sort of an overarching introduction to this item. We came before you about a year and a half ago and asked for time to extend the franchises in order to give the department time to engage with an outside expert to walk us through rethinking the way that we enable taxi cab service in the city of Los Angeles. The status quo has been deeply disrupted by the arrival of a lot of technology, transportation technology companies over the last several years. And as a result, taxi service has suffered. Drivers have suffered, owners have suffered, and riders have suffered. So our top line goals were to come up with a set of recommendations that would address the concerns that we were hearing from each of those groups. So I'm going to allow our taxi administrator, Jarvis Murray, to talk a little bit in a little bit more detail. But just to give you a high-level look, for the companies themselves, we're proposing to move from a franchise system to a permit system. And the fundamental difference between those two is that under a permit system, we establish fees that must have a nexus to full cost recovery of the service that we provide, versus franchises where we have a lot more discretion to raise fees that go beyond full cost recovery. We think that this will give the companies more predictable and more consistent fees and a more transparent view into what they're buying. buying when they buy a permit in the city of Los Angeles. As separate from this, but sort of related, we've done a massive overhaul, or in the middle of doing a massive overhaul of the systems that we use to onboard drivers, to make that process simpler and less painful for both the companies and the drivers themselves. For drivers, we are removing the requirement that the vehicles themselves have what we call trade dress. In other words, you no longer have to spend thousands of dollars to brand a vehicle, which means that that vehicle can be used for a lot of other things. When you brand a taxi cab vehicle, it can really only be used for that forever and ever, amen. And when it's done in the city of Los Angeles, there are very few places it can go. So we think it'll both make it less expensive to start driving a taxi in the city of Los Angeles and give drivers more flexibility to work between different companies. And for riders, we're proposing a universal dispatch, meaning that you should have a single app on your phone that gives you access to every cab in the city of Los Angeles, which we hope will reduce wait times and increase people's interest and reliability in using cabs. We're also removing the requirement to have a meter in the vehicle itself and give riders upfront fare confirmation, so they know when they get in the cab how much the ride will cost when they get out of the cab. And then for the department, we're proposing streamlined data collection, streamlined permitting, and really just a better strategy for us to enable a wider variety of companies to come into this market at any point in time. So under the franchise system, they have a fixed window, and if they don't make it in that window, a lot of times we see companies operating illegally. This system allows people to come in at any point in time, which we hope will invite a little bit more innovation in the market and improvement in the market at large.
Thank you. Ms. Reynolds covered quite a bit of what we are going to be doing, and one of the things that we want to impress upon the public and upon this committee is that we still feel that taxis are a very important part of our transportation ecosystem. A good 65% of our access trips, which are our elderly and disabled service, are subcontracted to taxi cab companies. We're still very interested in maintaining the service for all parts of our city. We're still interested in maintaining wheelchair accessibility priorities. But what we really want to do by changing this system is to create a system and a framework that allows us to expand innovation, open up various economic opportunities, because previously and currently under the franchise system is such a Byzantine process whereby it's very difficult for a company to make innovations, to make new changes, to bring in new ideas and to try new things. So part of what we've done with this study, and the study we've done with Sam Schwartz Engineering, Windows Marks as a law firm, and some researchers from UC Berkeley, part of what we've done with that study is to take a look at the industry, but also take a very strong look at ourselves in terms of how we are regulating. And so as we are moving forward, one of the things that Ms. Reynolds mentioned was that we are changing how we do our permitting and onboarding processes. We are moving all of those processes online so that drivers can make payments online, they will be able to submit documentation online, companies will be able to do all those things online, and that's something we expect to go live in the first quarter of 2020. We also, again, we expect to remove the meters out of the vehicle. That's an additional cost. And one of the things that will do by removing the meter and by relaxing the trade dress requirements is that it will allow the businesses to begin looking at opportunities such as leasing directly from the OEM manufacturers, working with an Avis or Hertz, or even facilitating a transition for the current Uber or Lyft driver who feels that maybe they can make a little more money driving a taxi cab. It'll be easier for them to move into our system. We do not ever expect to become you can sign up and drive within 2 hours. We still want to maintain the fingerprinting and the safety. We still expect to continue doing the drug testing. But overall, what we expect to do with this platform and what we've done through the study is we've looked at what other jurisdictions have done, and we're taking the best pieces of what they've done. We're looking at lessons that we've learned from TNC, some of the good things that we've learned, such as not the need for a trade dress, or also having an upfront price. That's something that the TNCs have taught us is a good thing and something that we want to impress upon the taxis. But we also want to take the things that make taxis great, servicing the entire city, servicing our elderly and disabled community, the training, the fingerprinting, the safety, the background checks, the customer service that we're trying to work on with them. We want to marry all of those things into an innovative framework, and we really do think that by making these changes, Los Angeles can take the lead on for-hire transportation throughout the city or throughout the country for how we manage regulations here.
Thank
Just
you.
want to close really quickly to give you a sense of where we are in the process. So we've done, Jarvis and his team have done an exceptional amount of outreach and gotten a lot of input from drivers at the companies where they work and from the owners themselves. We've presented the draft framework several times to the Taxi Commission. We expect the taxi companies and drivers to continue to be integral in the process, and we just really would be interested in getting input from the committee today.
Thank you. How old is the current franchise system? When did it start?
I believe the current franchise is, well, the most recent change was, I
The
believe,
model, the franchise model we're using.
since 1990, I believe.
Since the 1990s?
Yes.
Okay.
Mid-90s, right?
Early to mid-90s, correct.
Okay. So this thing is sort of old, and our system has been essentially frozen in amber for a while,
That's correct.
while the world and the industry has changed around it radically. So, I mean, the first thing that strikes me about this is that you're sort of taking a sledgehammer to sort of an old and broken system and getting rid of a lot of the bureaucracy and making it easier for the drivers. At the same time, it sounds like it's a hell of a lot easier for the customers, too. I'm glad the feedback from the industry has been good. The thing that strikes me about this is it seems like we are providing the opportunity under this new system, one, to open up the system overall, but two, to allow the taxi system to incorporate really most of the things that people like about the TNCs, the things that are popular. But at the same time, and this is what really intrigues me, is we have always had, as a city, the ability to insist on and regulate things that are important for us, looking out for the people of Los Angeles, the access for people with disabilities, serving all communities in Los Angeles, including low-income communities, and having a vehicle fleet that meets sustainability standards. So can you just, you mentioned a little bit, but could you just hit those three, the disabilities, all the different communities, and the sustainability, how this still protects those?
Well, so by moving to this more of a streamlined system, we're not removing the protections that currently exist in the franchise system. All that we're really doing is removing the exclusivity of it and allowing other players to enter the market. So by creating a permitting system, and we will continue hammering out a lot of these details through the commission, but by continuing this permitting system, we will simply have those things be permit requirements. So whether that's a percentage of your fleet being wheelchair accessible, requirements for the service and where it can be located, and also to develop incentives for that service. So perhaps we can develop better taxi zones in areas that need service, particularly in a particular way, or access to special events or special areas for companies that are top performing. So we really are looking at a higher performance standard for the companies, and part of that performance standard is ensuring that those things are not just done at a baseline level, but done at an improvement level, something that we can look to and point to as a standard.
So basically, we're creating a system where we're trying to encourage and entice people who operate the vehicles to participate in a system that is more fair and more just and required to be.
That's correct. And we will be looking at other things such as vehicle requirements, people with an EV plan, companies that have EVs that are coming in. Mm-hmm. We are focused on modernizing the system, and we believe that there's a lot of available technology to do these things, and our companies, for whatever reason, and partly it's regulatory, have not been able to take advantage of that newer technology.
Okay.
I'll just add the other thing that we are not letting go of, which I know is really critical, is fares and wages. Mm-hmm. And that will become even more important at the beginning of 2020. And hopefully we'll be able to apply that same lens to every company that delivers for-hire transportation, whether they are officially under our regulatory control or not.
Excellent. Ms. Martinez?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So under the new suggested permitting structure, what are some of the qualifications you'll be looking for in regards to new businesses wanting to enter the city to meet this need? What are you looking for?
Well, as of right now, the details, again, we're going to continue this process publicly, and we're going to continue it with our commission so that we can get more and more feedback. For instance, we've recently gotten some comments related to the study from our taxi cab companies where they've looked at various structures that they would like to see, potentially like a tiered structure for taxi cabs. And so we're going to be working with the industry over the next year in developing this. We expect to have the framework in place by the time the extension is done, but there will be many of the other things that we will be working out throughout the year. So some of the things we're looking at just in a preliminary space is minimum requirements for the number of vehicles to start a company, because we are not currently interested in having one-car cab companies everywhere. But that's kind of an early preliminary thing. What the right number is, we don't actually know just yet, but that is something that we're going to do through the commission with the industry's help and support in terms of developing what those parameters should be.
And what besides looking at the open market permitting system, did you look at any other systems?
We did. So we reviewed medallion systems, which are still very prominent. Chicago, New York, Philadelphia. They are also, Boston, to a certain extent, still run medallion systems. Other systems have open permitting, but with kind of entry requirements, such as Seattle. Seattle's kind of an open permitting system as well. What we are doing is we're innovating through a lot of little details, such as we were going to remove the caps on vehicles. So even though some of these markets have open permitting systems, they still maintain a cap on vehicles. Caps, and if you get through the study, caps really work much better in a much more geographically closed environment. We're not a geographically closed environment. We're not Manhattan. We're not San Francisco. We're not surrounded by bridges, and you have to cross a large body of water to get into us. So we are something where our constraints are a little bit different geographically. So we're going to be removing the caps on vehicles, but that's going to be part of our permitting system. And so what we're doing, again, is we're taking bits and pieces of those systems and making it so that we can create a better system. So it's going to be a little bit unique from what currently exists out there, but we are going to make a better system using pieces of those and some innovative ideas of our own.
And what other cities who follow this permitting system, what are they doing to maintain or assist their taxi industry in their cities?
Well, to be quite honest, they're looking at cities like us to see what are you going to do. So I made this presentation recently, about a month ago, at an industry conference full of taxi cab regulators, TNC regulators, and we're all trying to figure out how to marry these systems. And so my presentation was related to innovative frameworks. And so because of the size of our city and because of the uniqueness of the environment, we are trying things wholesale that other cities have tried piecemeal. Mm-hmm. Some have looked at potentially moving the meter, but they're a little bit afraid to see how that works. Others are looking at removing caps, but they're a little bit afraid to do that. And so they're looking at Los Angeles, actually, and we think we're going to be the North Star on these issues. And they're looking at us to say, can LA do this? And if LA can do this, perhaps we can follow that model. So we are actually going to be the model for moving these things forward.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kretz.
Yeah, as you might expect, I view this with a certain amount of skepticism, as I have everything we've done relating to taxis and Uber and Lyfts since they burst on the scene illegally without permits. Some of what we did with regulating taxis, we did to avoid a race to the bottom. So by allowing Uber and Lyft to engage in that race, they've been dropping their wages, et cetera. And some drivers complain now they're making less than minimum wage. So taxi cabs are still paying better, but they're doing it at the expense of higher rates. And we set those higher rates to some degree as well, so we've made it uncompetitive. We also require best practices, and in no way, even when we had the opportunity to leverage the issue at the airport, we don't try to make them engage in best practices. So Uber and Lyft don't have to have environmentally better vehicles. They don't have to cover the whole city. They can cherry pick their areas. They don't have to serve the disabled. So we've set up, and somewhat intentionally so by council vote, not to do anything different, a system that disadvantages one side and not the other. And frankly, we're probably about to destroy the industry anyway with what we're going to do at the airport, which is the only place where taxi cabs are competitive because of the convenience of them being at the curb. We're going to remove them from the curb, and I believe you'll see the industry largely disappear. But having already said that, I'm looking at what we gain by these, and some of them look positive, and some of them I have questions about. Moving to an open market system, it's without caps. So we already have an industry that is struggling and is uncompetitive. And by lifting caps, we may make it more uncompetitive because we're creating competition within the taxi industry, which can barely survive already without the competition from within the industry themselves. So I'm wondering, by creating more competition among taxi cab companies and allowing new ones and removing caps, if we aren't just reducing a pretty finite number of people that are going to take taxis anyway, diluting that by adding in more people and hastening the disappearance of the industry.
Well, my response to that is, actually, I think it's a little bit different. And so, in terms of the industry, this is a wholesale change that we're looking at. And before we can really have a conversation about whether the industry is going to be decimated one way or the other, we have to look at what the cost of doing nothing is. We could sit and we could decide to leave it status quo, but by doing that, we maintain this outdated system that doesn't help customers. One of the things that we're looking at doing, and Ms. Reynolds mentioned it, which is the centralized dispatching and also the removal of the meters. Right now...
Right, and let me say, I was going to go through those items one by one.
Right.
But some of them I think are great, and I think the cab industry has definitely struggled by not having a centralized system and a more Uber and Lyft-like app system. At the same time, you have some people that really only want to pay cash. And so the taxis, that's one more convenience of a taxi. So I don't want to see that completely removed.
Councilmember, just so that I understand your question just on the caps, is what you're saying that if we remove caps, there may be certain companies that are able to expand their fleet, but other companies that may, for whatever reason, financially cannot expand their fleet, and so we create maybe an uneven playing field inside the cab industry itself?
Well, and you create new companies that will come in and compete potentially, and ultimately you have that many more cabs. I'm not sure, since I think there's a finite demand for cabs, whether doubling the cab fleet or increasing it by 50% is a positive for the industry, which is already kind of hanging by a thread.
So I don't know if we have a direct answer to that question. That's good input for us to take back and think more deeply about. My initial reaction to it is that there's a tension between trying to preserve cab companies versus trying to create a large enough pool of cabs that a bigger market might come to rely on them. I think that's the main thing we learned from the arrival of Uber and Lyft, is that in fact maybe there is not a finite market for paid for hire transportation. And in fact, it is the large driver pool and the ability, and because the driver pool is so large, you know you can rely on a short wait time that expanded that market.
No, I agree, but I think you already have the competition from Uber and Lyft for the people that want to be able to just go on an app and see a car and show up in a minute. There are other reasons why the people that still use cabs use them. And I'm just fearful that we haven't looked at the potential unintended consequences. And with an industry that's really not hanging on by much more than a thread, if we do some things that unexpectedly make them worse, we're not helping ourselves.
So
I hope we'll take a closer look at that issue.
Yep.
So one by one, I'm also wondering what the value we're seeing is in not requiring taxis to look like taxis. And I'm assuming some of them is or are that, among other things, someone that drives for Uber and Lyft could also use the same car and drive as a taxi. So that's the plus. I think Uber and Lyft using regular cars, younger people consider that cooler. I had a staff person that usually travels by Lyft that took a taxi home from the airport after a long trip, just got back a day or two ago. And he said when he came back into his neighborhood and was dropped off, he was kind of embarrassed getting out of a taxi because he was used to Ubers and Lyfts that just look like regular vehicles. But on the other hand, some people that want to take taxis may find them harder to spot if they just look like regular vehicles. So I'm again wondering if we've looked at both directions of that issue.
I think it was an attempt for us to reduce cost for both the companies and the drivers. But just to be clear, we are now, by removing that requirement, we're leaving it up to the company's discretion. So from my perspective, whether or not to brand your vehicle should be a business decision and not a regulatory decision. And so that's really the aim here, is to allow them more power to sort of create the kind of service. If they still want to distinguish on a bright yellow vehicle or a green vehicle or whatever the case may be, now they can do that based on a sort of a business, from a business call. To your point, maybe there is a market that they see that really prefers that kind of a branded look, and they can keep that in place, or they can keep that in place for part of their fleet.
Right. And to add to that, we do expect to have some type of city identification that indicates that this car has been vetted by the city. We've seen the AAA inspection report, and something small that we can potentially put in the window, a little bit like what we see in the ambulances, or also what you see for the current TNC vehicles.
And on being able to accept cash?
Yes, that will not change.
Okay, we'll still maintain that. On the universal dispatching, how exactly will that work? Will it be similar to Uber and Lyft, where the closest vehicle might get called? And it's a little different because you might have a taxi stand where you have 3 taxis. Who winds up getting the call if you're essentially in the same place?
Right. Well, the technical specifications will be worked out. A third party would likely be handling that, and we will put together those specifications. But ideally, it would be something where it would be the closest taxi to your neighborhood, or to where you're calling from. But those algorithms are a little bit more complicated than that, but we expect the third party provider to provide that algorithm. And frankly, to answer one of your previous questions, that mechanism will improve, we think, taxicab utilization. Because right now, we still have many drivers who will wait at a hotel for hours for a trip, and they're the ones who are feeling like, we're being hurt and we're being squeezed, where there may be a trip 2 blocks away that they're not comfortable going to because, well, they've been calling for 10 minutes and somebody probably already got that, which I'm sure is something that you've already heard from other taxi companies. So really, we think by having that kind of a system, those drivers will no longer have to just sit for 2 hours. They'll know that there's a fare waiting 3 blocks away or 10 minutes away that I'm going to get, and they're going to be there. And we're going to look at building in many things like the TNC model, such as no-show fees, things like that if the customer doesn't come even though they've called the vehicle. So,
and presumably, in a similar vein, being able to see the vehicle approaching, which is
correct.
Very helpful. I mean, I tend to be a cab fan, but looking at them warts and all, I've been told that the cab was coming in 15 minutes and that it never shows. So
it's always coming in 15 minutes.
Exactly. So being able to actually see it, that would be, I think, a huge advantage and a big plus for the industry. Expedited driver onboarding, I think, again, it's a positive if you want more drivers. I mean, it probably makes sense anyway to not have a bureaucratic process. But again, the idea that we need to be able to turn out a bunch of taxi drivers, I re-express my fear about too many drivers and that possible negative impact. And using upfront pricing rather than using a meter. The advantage is the rider would know what they're paying. Perhaps the disadvantage is the rider would know what they're paying. So you might actually scare off some potential riders. I don't know if we're looking at other opportunities for taxis to lose ridership. So I hope we've looked at both sides of that issue as well. So just a few thoughts and concerns. I think we want to be sure that we look at all the potential unintended consequences and hopefully don't move forward with the ones that could actually have a negative impact on an industry that's already negatively impacted.
Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate the feedback.
Thank you. So, first of all, let me thank you again, both of you and your teams. Reforming and improving the system for regulating and managing taxis in Los Angeles for the benefit of the industry and for the benefit of the driver has been something that this council and the city have been promising for a very, very long time. I think really since I joined the council. I think there are members of the LA Taxi Commission who have served their full term and been reappointed, who when they first came to this committee for appointment were saying, we need to fix the system. And I know that the industry and the drivers have been clamoring for it for a long time. So, one, I want to thank you for getting this going and moving things forward, and really the collaborative way that you've worked with the industry and the drivers. You've done a real hell of a lot of outreach, and I think that's commendable. And clearly a lot of details to be put going forward, but I trust you'll continue to do the level of engagement and outreach you've been doing to the relevant stakeholders. Two parts to what...
If before you make your final motion, I want to add a motion for consideration.
Okay.
As was discussed by other folks in the audience, I think that we should move forward with digital rooftop advertising, especially since we do nothing to prevent it in all the other rideshare situations. So I'd like to move that number 10 on today's Transportation Committee agenda, Council File 10-0996-51, be amended to direct DOT to inspect any taxi interested in participating in digital rooftop advertising and direct DOT to establish a pilot program for digital rooftop advertising within 90 days. And I'd also like to attach a report from the Legislative Council Bureau in Sacramento, which serves the state legislature, on the legality of having these illuminated signs on vehicles.
This matter isn't on the agenda. You're talking about a major revision. It violates the Brown Act. You need to schedule that on a future meeting.
But can I ask a question, though, before you do that? So just to be very specific, if I understand your motion correctly, Mr. Koretz, are you amending the report, or you're not amending the city attorney's ordinance, right?
I'd like to
Can you do that just by amending the DOT report?
No.
To include this?
You need to, that would be a separate motion. You might hear it at a later.
So it needs to be a standalone motion?
Right.
So should I just introduce that at council then?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I introduced a motion on this very issue that hasn't moved. So I'm willing to support Mr. Koretz because I haven't seen any movement on my motion.
Is there a way to add it as an instruction in the report?
No, it's a separate motion.
I mean, I'd like to hear my motion in committee so we can deal with the issue. So I will second your motion because I haven't seen movement on my, I will second your motion now only because I haven't seen movement on my motion.
All you got to do is ask.
I believe that's been requested.
Nobody's asked me.
I'm asking you now.
Okay, then we will schedule it.
Thank you.
And for the record, for anybody listening, I will be happy to schedule, and I will be strongly against both of the motions. I am not in favor of digital advertising anywhere, period.
Understood, and I get where you're coming from, but I'd still like to have a discussion in committee on this issue.
Absolutely. I mean, we have before under the Blumenfield thing, but we can schedule again under a different motion for a conversation. And we can do that. Can we do that at the next meeting? We can do that at the next meeting.
Thank you.
Okay, so there are actually two parts to what DOT is asking for today. One is an extension of the current system by 6 months in order to continue work on this. There's, somebody commented, you commented, Ms. Reynolds, that the taxi's always coming in 15 minutes. Are the changes really coming in 6 months?
Well,
I mean, it's up to us,
we
ultimately.
have a
but-
fully vetted framework
Right.
that after we get your input and respond to final comments, we can bring back to you to move forward. And then that will enable the department to get into, once we have assurance that we're moving from franchise to permit, then we can go into the details of what that looks like and hopefully execute it fully within that 6 months. So we're ready, but we wanted to make sure we captured this last bit of input.
Okay. So the first ask is to approve the draft ordinance to extend the expiration date of the existing franchise for 6 months. Okay. And the second, I understand that the DOT and CLA have modified the language to approve the department's recommendations as amended. One, to approve the department's proposal to replace the current taxi cab franchise regulatory framework with an open market permitting system. And B, request the city attorney prepare and present the necessary ordinances for an open market permitting system for taxi cab service. And then that would all come back here for further discussion. Okay. All right.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Yes.
I'd like to ask the CLA to opine on whether I can amend this motion as I have requested.
I'm not the city attorney. I understand we have other motions that address that, so I would have to defer to the city attorney on the legality. I don't know.
You can't do it here right now because it would be a Brown Act violation, but there are already 2 pending motions that, including Councilmember
Martinez.
I'm sorry, and another motion. So the council member has said he's going to schedule that at the next meeting, so I don't know why we're still discussing this at this point.
All right, fine.
Okay. So is there any objection to the amended recommendation?
Nope.
Okay. No objection to that. And we will approve that, send it to council, and then we will discuss the digital ads at the next meeting. All right. That brings us to, actually, I'm going to suggest we hear 11 and 12 together since they're very related, and I think the questions are going to bleed into each other.
Okay, item 11 is a DOT report relative to the status of ongoing discussions with mapping applications, including Apple Maps, TomTom, Google, and Waze for the implementation of a traffic routing pilot program as a condition of entering into new data sharing agreements. And item 12 is the Krikorian Koretz motion requesting the city attorney to prepare an ordinance amending the municipal code to expressly prohibit the use of digital applications and digital infrastructure to reroute vehicular traffic that is inconsistent with official city street designations.
Thank you. Okay, so two pieces to this. The two will sort of bleed together. One is item 11 was our attempt to try to get the companies to cooperate with us on something voluntary. And essentially, some of them had some interest, but the big dog Waze basically told us to kiss off.
Good afternoon. My name is Jana Smith from the LADOT New Mobility Team. I'll give you just a quick overview that you already kind of encapsulated as well. We're reporting back on LADOT's ongoing negotiations and communications with various different mapping application companies in pursuit of a voluntary pilot project to implement changes to routing to lessen the impacts of app-enabled routing on neighborhood streets specifically. In September 2019, LADOT shared their pilot project proposal with Waze and Google Maps, which we communicated with together, Apple Maps, and with TomTom. And this pilot would have included directing app users away from neighborhood streets or school zones in defined areas at specific times of day. And then we would also be able to share data with those companies to measure and evaluate the impacts that the routing changes would have on congestion or safety issues and traffic volumes in those areas. Apple Maps was very open and responsive and is looking forward to hopefully implementing a pilot partnership. TomTom remained open, but we're still very early in our conversations with them and building the partnership with them. However, Waze and Google Maps did decline to participate in the pilot as it was proposed. So that's where we're at.
Okay. I'm particularly disappointed in Google. And
they're in your district?
They're in my district, and they're about to go into his district, too.
Yep.
And they better not be using Waze to cut through the neighborhoods to get...
I'm sure they will.
That's exactly what they're planning to do.
Okay, and then, which really gives us I mean, it really points us directly to Mr. Krikorian's proposal, which is the next item, which would be to come up with an ordinance that prohibits the way things are happening now with the sort of plague of cut-through traffic for us. Can you update us on where we are with that? I know we've worked with CD2 to sort of refine the language of what the ask is, but if you could talk a little bit about that item.
Tim Fremo, Department of Transportation. I think what we're trying to do is basically work within the confines of the vehicle code, which establishes essentially the authority of what at the local level can be regulated. And it allows, we believe that it allows the city to have some latitude over how we regulate at the local level. Within that, the municipal code has language based primarily to regulate the directing of traffic as is defined. Essentially, it was really meant more back when it was written to regulate traffic officers and delegate the authority only to them or to, first responders, et cetera. What we're trying to do is essentially establish, to clarify and to redefine, to expand that definition to include directing traffic through electronic means through mapping applications in such a manner that an app would guide a large volume potentially of users onto a specific street or potentially into a hazardous area during a fire, for example. We believe that that constitutes potentially a public safety hazard.
Sure.
So what we're trying to do is essentially create a new, to rewrite the LAMC to better define and clarify that authority.
So what Mr. Krikorian has been talking about, I mean, a lot of us have been talking about this for a while. Mr. Krikorian did the motion, but I mean, the way he has articulated it is that we have and have had for a very long time different types of streets in Los Angeles. We have collector streets, we have secondary highways, and they are defined for certain purposes. And we have defined them for certain purposes. The city has developed around them in certain ways as WAYS as a result of that. And what the inevitable result, if not the intention of some of these mapping technologies has been, is to take those determinations out of the hands of the city and put them into the hands of someone who doesn't have the same public policy objectives of regulating traffic properly and keeping our neighborhoods safe. So right now we've got situations where I think all of us experience a neighborhood suddenly overnight becomes sort of a mini cut through to the freeway or from the freeway. But and my understanding is we also have a system where the other day, fire in the Palisades, the city shut down to vehicular traffic Palisades Drive. But there is nothing currently that compels Waze to also indicate that it is shut down. Is that correct?
That's correct. They're not required to do so.
Okay, all right. So just so we have the right context for the discussion and the questions I'm sure my colleagues will have, is trying to craft the right language to get to the objective of Mr. Krikorian's motion, given the parameters that Tim outlined, was a bit challenging. We worked with CD2 with the suggested amendment to the language, which is to request that the city attorney prepare and present an ordinance that would amend the LAMC and the LA Administrative Code to provide that the Department of Transportation shall have exclusive authority over the provision of digital infrastructure that regulates traffic, and to expressly prohibit the addition, deletion, or other modification of digital traffic control by other entities. Someone want to explain that?
So Salita Reynolds, General Manager. So today, in the physical world, we go up and we put in a sign that says no left turn. If somebody got up in the middle of the night and took that sign down, we have fees and things that we would charge that person with, because that's not legal. We have the exclusive ability to prohibit, do those kinds of changes to traffic control. We would never allow somebody to go and flip the one-way signs on a one-way street in the physical world. So what we are asking for is to extend that into the digital realm. So as it stands now, we do have the ability to share information with digital mapping companies and navigation companies about closures and about changes, but we have no ability to enforce their incorporation of those changes into their algorithms. And because many of them are crowdsourced, or they have amateur map editors that are allowed to make changes to their maps, any one of those sources can make a change to a city regulation on a public street. And so this is a request to clarify our regulatory authority over traffic control in the digital version of our physical streets. So it's actually pretty straightforward, and has a very clear set of established regulation when it comes to signs and signals outside, that you can see with your eyes. We're just changing that to make sure those same things apply to those things in the palm of your hand.
Okay. Either of you have questions?
Yeah, I have two questions. So what's the apprehension that some of these companies have expressed on why they're not participating in the pilot program? What are their concerns?
Well, I think the main concern is, in addition to the data sharing piece, I think we haven't gotten to that point in the discussion, having consensus on how and to what extent they would be able to share data on, say, what changes in traffic behavior are observed. That's one point. But also, I think it's just making sure that all of the different app users or folks that are not using the apps are on a level playing field. I think that's the main concern also, is that none of them want to be necessarily singled out for special treatment, positive or negative.
I think what you're feeling is a general pushback of any kind of regulatory oversight, and that exists in every single realm of transportation where we've tried to come in and get even a small amount of data or apply certain rules to operations. There's been a very strong pushback. It's difficult to get to the real reason, but the reasons given are we don't want our app users to have to be subject to different rules from people who are just in cars not using the app.
Yeah. And so how committed do you feel the companies that are willing to participate in the pilot program are? Is there a real commitment there on behalf of these companies that are willing to participate?
Yeah.
It varies by company.
Well, yeah.
Okay.
For the ones that have expressed interest, yes. For those that haven't.
It's a direct reflection of company culture, I think.
Yeah. And then the other question I had is, so how are we communicating this pilot effort to the communities that are actually being affected by all this, like the people that are complaining in some of these neighborhoods? How are we communicating that we're not going to enter into this pilot program?
I think.
Do they know?
No, I don't think we've gotten to the point yet of what our strategy would be on outreach to those communities. Primarily, we've been looking at least 4 locations for the communities. We also haven't narrowed that down specifically. We've got some kind of examples we've been working around, and that's mainly communities that we've heard from council and from other venues through our district offices, things like that, that have been experiencing the negative impacts of a lot of that cut-through traffic.
Yeah, I interact with folks on the ground daily, and I'm intentionally vague about what's possible because I don't know, because I'm honestly pessimistic given what we've heard so far. But I think people generally understand that the apps are essentially a little bit rogue, and that they understand that, and they're just as frustrated essentially as we are at the fact that we have little, at this point, been able to succeed in getting them to change.
Yeah. Thanks.
Okay, Mr. Kretz.
Yeah, I think there are probably 2 reasons why the companies don't participate that don't. One is they're sort of being the NRA of traffic direction. Any kind of regulation at all will just lead to more regulation, so they just want to stop it all. I think also
Good soundbite.
The other thing is the companies that won't participate are going to be the quickest. So if you follow one of the ones that doesn't take every shortcut that ruins every neighborhood and saves you 30 seconds on an hour-long trip, you're giving away that 30 seconds or minute, and a lot of those customers want every last second. For me, the highest priority is the emergency priority. If we did nothing else, we have to address that. I mean, in the Skirball fire, it could have been more disastrous than it was, but nobody was shortcutting through the area that was evacuated and where the fires were the hottest. And so they were directing everyone through it to the point where fire equipment blocked the way, and they had to turn around. And then they were just roaming in an area that most people had never been in before, that usually just takes Sepulveda or the 405. And had the fires gotten worse, as they probably should have, had not LAFD been as brilliant as they were, there could have been a lot of dead drivers because of this app. Could have been the same thing that we just saw in the Palisades, where again, LAFD did an amazing job of avoiding harm and rescuing homes, but a little worse luck and a little more wind and people being misdirected could have been trouble. Also, I don't know if there's any way to include Nextdoor in that, because I heard that Nextdoor directed people to take fire roads.
Oh, it was absolutely.
And somebody went out with some clippers and opened up the fire road, and then everybody was taking it, and potentially you blocked fire equipment
took
doing
the fire road into the areas being evacuated.
Right, so it's the worst possible nightmare again, and again, everything went as well as it could have been handled by those that should, so nobody was harmed, but could have been terrible. So I don't know if there's a way to deal with those apps in addition, but if there's a way to make them not cause trouble in a life and death fire emergency, which we know now in our climate change world, we're going to have wildfires probably every year somewhere in LA. We've got to be able to address this more aggressively.
That's the cost of technology. Everybody wants it cheaper and faster.
Yep. I should say, just to be fair, since I used the example of Palisades the other day and Palisades Drive, I do know that on that day, although they're not legally required to do so, and I agree they should be legally required to do so, Waze was following what was going on and did actually cut down Palisades Drive. I don't want to suggest otherwise, because they did what they were supposed to that day.
Yeah, I think to their credit, they have learned the lesson from the Skirball fires, but it's discretionary.
Yes.
And it's discretionary when they allow people back in, and really, the city ought to be the final word on that.
Yes.
So it's discretionary to put people's lives in danger?
As it stands now, yes.
Well, historically, this has always been the jurisdiction of a Department of Transportation under both state law and our charter and the administrative code. Therefore, this is not a big leap to take over the digital infrastructure, because that's where technology is today.
Right.
And the liability, we're looking at it from the same way you are in an emergency situation, to direct people into the Malibu fires, to direct people in North Carolina during the hurricanes onto flooded streets. It's
Okay, thank you. So then without objection, we'll receive and file item 11 on the pilot program and approve as amended the recommendation language on item 12. Great. Thank you very much for your work. Thank you to CD2 if you're listening. All right, that brings us to item number 13.
Item number 13 is a DOT report relative to an update of the dockless bike scooter share pilot program.
And before we start, we have two public comment cards on that, so I'll hear from, we suddenly have, it says two, but I see three names. Carla Uwanwane, Omar Gonzalez, and Rachel Wasser. Come on up if you're here.
Omar.
Good afternoon. What's your name?
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Carla Wane. I'm here on behalf of Lime and would like to start off by emphasizing how proud we are to be one of the 8 operators serving the city of Los Angeles during this one-year pilot program, the largest of its kind in the U.S. We sincerely appreciate the public-private partnership that we have been able to form with both LADOT and LAPD, and we're hopeful that we can continue to build on that. In a recent INRIC study found that 50% of trips in LA are under 3 miles and 20% are under a mile. It's incredibly encouraging to see the validation of the work that the city, council, LADOT, and the industry as a whole are doing to provide more transportation options to residents and tourists alike. We would briefly like to address a company that has impounded some scooters across several permitted operators, Scootoff. We have concerns that this illegal seizing of our vehicles can become a larger problem in LA, like it has in other markets. We hope that Transportation Committee can work with operators and city staff to ensure that this does not affect the ongoing continuation and success of the shared mobility program. We look forward to continuing to improve our efforts and identify best practices during the remaining 5 months of the pilot.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Omar Gonzalez, and I'm with Bird's Government Partnerships team. First, a special thank you to LADOT, Ms. Reynolds, Marcel, Jose, Janelle, Robin, everyone who keeps us compliant for implementing this dockless program and for creating this report, which is showing that the demand is great for dockless mobility and it continues to grow. As an update on our end, Bird has been putting people on the ground to respond to 311 complaints and to encourage proper parking, picking up scooters, all the operational aspects that happen on the ground. We've also been bolstering rider education for proper parking, riding, and discouraging tandem and underage riders. We've been using LA as a test market for parking incentives to encourage better parking behaviors, and we've opened up an additional service center which LADOT staff visited, which is employing dozens of Angelinos and continues to hire. On the outreach side, Bird has given presentations to over 50 groups, including BIDs, neighborhood councils, CPABs, like last night, HOAs, and community organizations. One concern we share with our riders continues to be the lack of safe infrastructure.
Thank you, sir. Rachel Wasser, did you want to comment? You're good? Okay. All right, staff can come on up, please.
Good afternoon, Marcel Porras, Chief Sustainability Officer at LADOT.
Good afternoon. My name is Jose Elias, LADOT. So I'm the project manager working on Dockless, and I'm here to provide a quick update on the program. So one of the things that it's important to note, so we're halfway in through the initial pilot. So we are consistently receiving or getting over 1 million rides, and at the same time, service requests continue to decline. Additionally, LADOT continues to do community outreach, and we've partnered with LAPD and attended 6 community police advisory board meetings within the last couple months, and this was in the Central, Valley, and West traffic divisions. And another thing is, from the feedback we received at these meetings, moving forward and looking at the future of the program, LADOT onboarded a consultant to develop a methodology to help us evaluate the program. So this includes scorecards, fines, and compliance tools. And with that, we're open to answer any questions.
Anything you want to add, Bruce?
No, I think just to reiterate what my colleague said, I think we're at the halfway point, and I think as the report points to, there's a lot of ongoing efforts underway as there's several different components of the program that we're responsible for managing. I think our partnership continues to grow with different city departments, I think namely the police department as a key ally in helping to track what's happening on the streets right now. I will make one note in the report, and LAPD can talk to this as needed in the report. We do highlight that there was a scooter death. I do want to clarify that it is a scooter-related death. The individual actually was not did not die as a result of falling off the scooter. It was actually run over by a car in trying to flee the hit and run at the scene. And so I just wanted to clarify that, but this gets into the nuances of how we're making sure that we're tracking safety and data and working with LAPD to make sure that we're getting the right statistics before this body.
Thanks. Thanks for the update and the report. I want to thank you particularly for the work you guys have done to help with the swarms that we have had in Venice. It has swarms. We just had a flood of scooters in Venice. Yeah, just a total oversaturation, and that has been addressed significantly. Still not optimal, but significantly better than it was. So I want to thank you for that. One of the biggest complaints, though, we continue to get is about parking. So I'm curious, when's the department going to finalize the standard for scooter corrals so we can ease some of the pressure on the sidewalks?
So that's one of the things that we still continue to work with our geo-design team. They're currently doing the revisions as we speak. So I think one of the things that they're looking to work towards is finalizing the design of just no scooter parking or scooter parking specific designs that they have never really drafted before. So that's one of the things that we're continuously working with.
So we will provide an update on the timeline at the next 90-day report, if not sooner.
Sooner.
Soon.
Sooner?
Yeah.
Sooner. Within the next couple weeks, we will provide a timeline.
Yes, that would be good. Yeah. I appreciate knowing what needs to be done, but it's the when I was really focused on. Do we have any general trends about how scooter collisions are occurring? Is it rider behavior, driver behavior? Do we know any of that? Or is it the infrastructure problems, potholes?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Do we have any data on what types of collisions we're having and what the cause is? Is it drivers who are causing it? Is it the scooter riders? Is it our broken streets?
The data that we received, it's mostly collisions with vehicles and scooters. But as far as the cause, I would have to refer to LAPD on how it's reported and who the fault is.
If you could try to get that for the next report. The other thing is, and I apologize if I missed it, when we were talking at the last update about the injuries and the collisions, I had wanted us to look not just at the scooters, but do it in comparison. Mm-hmm. We can say there's been X number of accident or collisions with scooters, and therefore say these are unsafe. But I was interested in comparing with automobiles or pedestrians comparatively, statistically, how safe it is. Do we have that?
Unfortunately, we don't. As we were looking at our capacity to do that analysis, as part of this report, we really identified some gaps, particularly in the way the data is reported across. From LAPD. Mm-hmm. I think also realizing that it seemed to me that you wanted a kind of an apples-to-apples comparison, not just total collisions, but I think in reference to the mode. And so I think we need to do some deeper research and understanding what is the right type of metric. Like, is it vehicles permitted in the county? Is that statistics that we get from DMV or the state? And then also kind of some calculations maybe like on vehicle miles traveled. So that's kind of what I saw as the intent, and I saw that was kind of a deeper, kind of a research question.
Yeah.
And so now that we've onboarded a consultant, we're looking at kind of leveraging them to help us do some kind of that deeper scholarly research, as well as working with LAPD to understand how they're tracking that information. But there was just some limitations in what we could deliver.
Okay. Yeah, that information will be helpful. I mean, I see that e-scooter collisions account for, we think, 0.5% of reported crashes citywide. I just don't know what that means. I don't know if that's disproportionately high or disproportionately low comparatively.
So one of the things that we did look at is comp stats. And looking at the comp stats, there are about 36,000 vehicle traffic collisions. And what was reported from LAPD and LAFD is looking at about 200 scooter-related incidents.
Okay, thank you. I would be shocked if Mr. Kretz didn't have questions on this one.
I have nothing to say. No, I'm just kidding. Just wanted to shock you.
Not a moratorium anywhere?
First on the actual accidents, I have some completely unscientific feedback from one of the companies that, I shouldn't say companies, one of the law firms that represents exclusively scooter accident victims. Now that's skewed because it's the people that would actually take legal action, but most of their accidents are relating to flaws in the scooters themselves. So the platform's breaking in half, the handles breaking off, the brakes going out. I assume both of those things could be diminished dramatically and are probably already starting. Some companies appear to have more solidly built vehicles now. I don't know if some of the older companies have replaced their vehicles yet. Also, some companies, I believe, still have sort of random people picking them up and maintaining them in their apartments, and sometimes issues about whether they're using their landlord's electricity, but that's neither here nor there. And some now actually having a company pick them up and doing all their own maintenance. I think if we made sure we took some of those steps and encouraged the companies in the evolution of scooters physically to make them more solidly, I would think it would pay off for them in the reduced number of lawsuits that would be caused by the poor structure and maintenance of their vehicles. That might actually be most of what I wanted to say, is that I'm noticing, just anecdotally, less of many of the problems that we've had. I see fewer scooters on the sidewalks. Might possibly be, again, skewed by the fact that I live in a neighborhood where we've done some high-profile work in letting people know that you can't ride on sidewalks, including several of the major streets having the decals on the ground. But I'm seeing many fewer. I noticed 4 kids together on 4 different scooters that were clearly underage, but it was more noticeable because I'm not seeing that very much anymore, the way I was with great frequency. So I think we're doing a decent job of getting at a lot of the issues. I'm seeing more scooter riders on the streets in interior areas rather than on the sidewalks. So I think in general, we're getting a pretty decent handle on this. And I think our infrastructure could continue to improve, and if we really push the companies hard to do better maintenance and produce a better product. As convinced as I am that there's probably no way to do this completely safely, we appear to be a lot safer and could be getting even more so. Also, one of the things I've encouraged a couple of companies to do, since our streets are still not in great shape, our sidewalks are not in perfect shape, I'm more nervous about riding at night. I've seen people heading towards giant potholes at night on my street, and I cover my eyes and hope that they miss them. But if there's better lighting also on these vehicles than there were initially, I think that would protect health and safety as well.
Ms. Martinez?
Yeah, I was wondering if you could share usage data. I want to figure out where, do you have an indication of what the usage is like in different communities?
We haven't done as deep of analysis on a community-by-community basis, but we have started
And
to...
how are we holding these companies accountable to make sure that they're in underserved communities?
So as part of the pilot program, we looked at the first pass of this program, looked at really using incentives to locate vehicles in disadvantaged communities. And the incentive that we used was by offering a reduced permit fee. So I believe it's $39 per vehicle
But
per
we
company.
currently don't have data to show whether there is.
So
Lita, you want to help me here?
We do have data that shows where they are. We didn't make any requirement that they go into those communities. We just built in incentives. And one of the findings from the report is that incentives alone were not enough to get the kind of service in low-income communities, specifically in the San Fernando Valley, that we were hoping to get when we launched the program. So we are seeing service in certain disadvantaged communities, but the hot spots in the city are downtown, Hollywood, and the West Side.
You do have that data?
Absolutely.
You can share it with us?
Yes.
Okay. My next question is, so how are we engaging riders and communities to report through the 311 app? Because even though ridership is growing, you can also see the 311 requests are declining. So where are you seeing, where the 311 requests coming from? Do you see a pattern or
They tend to correlate with where the most ridership is happening. So that's in the West Side.
You're seeing the decline in requests as well?
Yes, we are. We've also added another modularity where people can report sidewalk riding. That isn't going to help us with specifically preventing it, but it helps us deploy potential education campaigns or stencils, and then working with also LAPD, we can show them where we see it happening so that they can target some of their enforcement strategies.
Okay, and then the last question I had, just to piggyback on what Mr. Bonin was asking in terms of the e-scooter incidences. So that looks like there's been an increase since the last report, if I read this correctly. Is there an increase since the last time we heard an update in committee of e-scooter incidences?
I don't.
I thought
we didn't do the same baselining that we did in this report back at the launch, and we also didn't there were fewer scooters on the ground when we, 6 months ago at the last report, so it's possible that the increase in incidents just correlates to the increase in scooters.
So the way I read it is since the last time you were here, there's been 223 e-scooter incidences.
These are from the beginning of the calendar year.
Okay, and when you were here last time, the number of incidences was closer to 160, is that correct?
I would need to double check on the numbers.
That's what I have. So my question is there a pattern in certain areas in terms of what kinds of incidences you're seeing?
You mean in terms of safety? I think that's what
And what types of incidences are occurring? Is it car on scooter incidences or individual running into a scooter running into individuals walking on the sidewalk? What are the incidences that are occurring? Do you see a pattern?
So looking at some of the statistics, we do see about 85 to 90% are vehicle versus scooter related. And as far as party at fault, it's still, I need to look at this more closely, but it's the way it's listed, it's party at fault, and it could be either the scooter or the vehicle. And I would have to just further take a deeper dive into the numbers.
I think as part of the past budget package, we were identified 6 positions to support the program, 2 of which are data analyst positions. I think right now we're continuing to run the program with existing resources and borrowed staff from other programs. With bringing the consultant on board is also augmenting the ability to do more data analytics. I think the focuses of the program has been the day-to-day response to kind of community input that we were getting. As part of this, we're also looking at how we can leverage other stakeholders to help kind of spread out the message and report back from the field. As part of that is we've convened a core advisory board that's made up of community organizations, including AARP, Pacoima Beautiful, Slate Z, a disability organization, public health organization, because there's some things that we are just not going to have the expertise to understand what's happening on the field. And that goes not just for the safety components, but just the distribution, right? I think one of the questions that came up during this was that that the companies aren't deploying the vehicles that they are eligible to deploy in the San Fernando Valley. So in speaking with the executive director of Pacoima Beautiful, she's now like, let me go back to my community and understand why are they not deploying here and why are people not interested in it, or are they? And so I think that's just kind of some of the groundwork that we're laying to continue to evaluate and make recommendations on how the program can be improved upon.
Okay. You just share the usage data with me. I'd appreciate that.
Okay, Mr. Kretz.
Yeah, I was
That was too brief before.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking about one of the things we were talking about. So trying to explain statistics, I think there's really 3 kinds of accidents relating to scooters: scooters versus vehicles, scooters versus pedestrians, and scooters versus nothing. And I suspect the latter category is probably reducing as maintenance and structure of these vehicles are getting better. So you're probably seeing fewer sort of unforced errors where the handles break off or the brakes go out, where it actually has nothing to do with anything but the actual vehicle. I suspect you also could have fewer pedestrian accidents and more street accidents because we're forcing people off the sidewalks where they're more likely to have bad interactions with pedestrians and more into the street where it's more of a contest with cars. So if we could look at those factors when we do our analysis as well, I think that would be helpful.
I'd suggest there's also one more. I mean, you said scooters versus cars, scooters, pedestrians, scooters, nothing. I think there's also scooters versus infrastructure. Whether it's, a pothole or our infrastructure is probably the cause of a lot of incidents, as it is for pedestrians and cyclists. Okay, so without objection, we will receive the department's reports from August and October.
When are you back here? So we've got how many more months on the pilot? 6?
Yeah, we're halfway through.
We're halfway through, so you're back when?
So the pilot ends April 15th, and so we're in a sprint to try to get you something by January.
And then what happens after April?
Well, I think in January we're starting to come with some preliminary findings and recommendations for what's the next phase of the program.
Okay. All right, so that we'll receive those reports, and that will conclude the regular meeting, which we will adjourn, and then we will open the special meeting, which has a single item.
Special meeting item number 1 is a CAO report relative to LADOT contract with Shelter Clean for the period of October 1st, 2019 through September 30th, 2024 for an amount not to exceed $8.5 million for landscape maintenance and facility maintenance services of the bike path and transit facilities.
Okay, this is one item agenda, so we do not need to do general public comment, correct?
Correct.
Right. Okay, so we have a few cards on the item. First, Jeff Jacoberger.
Great. Thank you. Jeff Jacoberger, Legislative Deputy for Councilmember Bob Blumenfield. Councilmember Blumenfield does not want to hold this item up, but wants to express some concerns about the way the contract is set up, which spreads responsibility for maintenance and upkeep of our bike paths across too many departments. Our office gets a lot of complaints about and spends a lot of time on maintenance and cleanliness of the West Valley River bike path. Under the current system, maintenance of the bike path itself is the responsibility of Shelter Clean, while Rec and Parks is responsible for the landscaping. In practice, that sometimes means that when Shelter Clean is cleaning the bike path, stuff gets moved to the landscaping, and when Rec and Parks comes through, stuff gets moved back onto and blocks the bike path. Both the city and the county point fingers at each other when there is an issue with the fencing or there is graffiti on the concrete river banks. We have a group of incredible constituents who volunteer their time to help keep the bike path in good shape, but it isn't fair for them to have to submit issues to multiple departments and contractors or to have to clean up trash that various departments have not removed. The lack of coordinated responsibility is costing us political support for continued improvements on the river, and moving forward, we need to make a single entity responsible for all of the improvements this city installs along any segment of the river. We have no specific ask, but just want to raise that, that issue. Thank you.
Great. Ben Allen Hill. Mr. Ben Allen Hill. Okay, Mr. Previn, then Mr. Schmidt, and then Mr. Spindler.
Thank you. It's Eric Previn from CD2, and I would echo Popach, or not Mr. I forget his name, but the guy from Bloomfield's office. We have also issues with Studio City, the city versus the county along our river. This is an $8.5 million contract to that group called Shelter Clean, which had the contract for CBS DeCaw, which Bloomfield has been chasing out front as their current entity. And, $4 million goes for bike lanes, 3.4 for transit centers, and $1 million for other LADOT. How can we ensure that this work is really being done? They're giving us something called an economy of scale pricing. The other artists who work in this space were dismissed in favor of this group. I don't know. I feel like, first of all, it was a $5.3 million contract for 5 years. It's going up to $8.5 million. So why such a large increase? And is this really, is there any way to hold them accountable? Thanks.
Yes, Dwayne from Transportation, niggas a 501c4. Now we talk about this sleazy load of money, $8.5 million fucking dollars to go 5 years into advance. Now, they're going to take the money, they're going to clean up what? They're going to clean up shit, they're going to clean up piss, they're going to clean up AIDS, they're going to clean up all of this stuff. Oh, your homeless motherfucker's been doing on the bike path and transit. I know people who shit on bike paths. I know people who shit on transit facilities. I know people who shit on the sidewalk. I know people who piss on the bus rails. $8.5 million just ain't enough money for this fucking shit. I'll say double it to 17 million. And finally, fuck Mike Bonin and this committee. Thank you so much.
Corey still here? No. He's not? Okay. Do you have any questions on this item? Okay, so without objection, this item is approved. And I believe that takes care of all of our business. We are adjourned. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you.